They were the faces of old Hollywood, handsome, talented, and adored by millions, but behind the scenes, they were living a different truth. In an era that demanded silence, these stars loved in secret, risking everything just to be themselves. Some were forced into fake marriages. Others lived quiet lives with lifelong partners no one ever saw. Today, we're telling the real stories of love hidden, of courage masked by charm, and of men who left a legacy far bigger than fame. These are 20 Hollywood legends who were actually gay and whose truth deserves to be remembered. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was the ultimate American heartthrob. Tall, square-jawed, with a voice like velvet, he was Hollywood's ideal leading man, starring in romantic hits like Pillow Talk and Giant. But behind all the charm and carefully staged romance, Hudson was living a double life. Because while women swooned over him, Rock Hudson was a gay man, forced to hide every part of himself just to survive in the industry. Studio heads built a full-blown fantasy around him. Dates with actresses were staged for the cameras. Tabloids were fed just enough romance to keep the public satisfied. Rock went along with it, not because he was ashamed, but because he knew what the truth could cost. As one friend later put it, if Rock had come out, it would have destroyed his career in 5 minutes. And in the 1950s, that was absolutely true. Still, Hudson had real love in his life. For years, he had a secret relationship with his on and off partner, Mark Christian. They traveled together, lived together, but never openly. Friends and co-stars like Doris Day later admitted they knew or suspected the truth. But everyone stayed quiet. The world wasn't ready, and Rock knew it. So he kept smiling, kept acting, and kept hiding. Everything changed in 1985. Hudson became the first major celebrity to die from AIDS, and suddenly, the truth wasn't just whispered, it was shouted. His death forced the world to reckon with the reality of the disease and the silence surrounding it. Nancy Reagan refused to help him get into a French hospital trial. The news shocked even his closest allies. But in the end, Rock Hudson's life and death helped open a door. He didn't mean to become a symbol, one friend said, but he did, just by being himself. From a man who died hiding to another who fought to live freely, our next story follows Tab Hunter, a matinee idol who finally reclaimed his truth after years of silence. His journey proves that coming out isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just honest. Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter had the smile, the surfboard, and the all-American charm. In the 1950s, he was the boy next door, blonde, blue-eyed, and seemingly built for teen magazines. But behind the glossy covers and staged romances with women like Natalie Wood, Tab was carrying a truth that terrified the industry. He was gay, and he was tired of pretending. His real name was Arthur Kelm, and before the fame, he'd already begun exploring his identity. But once Hollywood got hold of him, that freedom disappeared. The studio arranged fake dates and kept close watch. Even his own agent warned him, "Don't ruin this. Keep quiet. Smile for the cameras." So he did. 4 years. But behind closed doors, Tab fell in love. He had relationships with fellow actors, including a long, quiet romance with figure skater Ronnie Robertson. One of his deepest relationships was with actor Anthony Perkins, yes, Norman Bates himself. The two lived carefully, avoiding photos, never going out together in public. But those who knew them said they were inseparable for years. It wasn't just affection, it was love. And yet, fear ruled everything. When the press sniffed around, they split. Their careers couldn't risk the truth. In 2005, Tab Hunter finally told his story in his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential. He wrote, "I believed being gay would ruin my career, and I was right, it would have. But by then, things had changed. He was celebrated, not shunned. His honesty helped redefine what it meant to come out later in life." When he died in 2018, just shy of his 87th birthday, the world didn't remember the lies. It remembered his truth. Tab Hunter found peace in the end, but our next story belongs to a man who never stopped struggling. Montgomery Clift had beauty, talent, and depth, but his private pain nearly consumed him, and his love stories were often wrapped in heartbreak. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift was one of the most emotionally raw actors Hollywood ever saw. With a gaze that could break your heart, he brought deep vulnerability to roles in A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity. But off-screen, Clift's real pain ran deeper than anything he ever played. He was a closeted gay man, tormented by guilt, fear, and the heavy silence Hollywood demanded. He had real relationships, some short, some long, but none public. One of his early lovers was choreographer Jerome Robbins. Later, he fell hard for a fellow actor, Jack Larson, best known as Jimmy Olsen on The Adventures of Superman. But no matter who he loved, Monty lived in fear. He was raised Catholic and carried a deep sense of shame about his sexuality. He once wrote, "I am hopelessly divided. My heart is at war with my mind." His inner battles were worsened by a horrific car accident in 1956. His face was shattered. His smile, once famous, never looked the same. He became addicted to painkillers and alcohol, spiraling further inward. But he kept acting, delivering stunning performances despite the emotional and physical toll. Still, few knew how deeply he was suffering, or how hard he was trying to survive in a world that wouldn't let him be himself. Clift died in 1966 at just 45 years old. The cause was officially a heart attack, but friends knew the truth. It was a slow death, built on years of repression, addiction, and emotional exhaustion. Today, he's remembered as one of the greats, not just for his acting, but for the way he revealed the cracks in Hollywood's golden image. Behind his beauty was bravery, even if it broke him. Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr, best remembered as the sharp, commanding Perry Mason, lived one of the most carefully constructed double lives in all of old Hollywood. On camera, he was the picture of masculinity, smart, brooding, in control. But behind the scenes, Burr went to astonishing lengths to hide a truth that didn't fit the image the studios wanted. He was gay. He invented entire parts of his biography to protect himself. Burr claimed to have been married to a woman named Annette Sutherland, who tragically died in a plane crash. He also said they had a son who died of leukemia. But journalists and biographers later discovered none of these people ever existed. In fact, Burr never married a woman, and his so-called son was completely made up, a fiction designed to throw off suspicion. The real story? Burr spent more than 3 decades with one man, Robert Benavides, an actor turned producer. The two met on the set of Perry Mason in the 1960s and were inseparable until Burr's death in 1993. They owned a vineyard together, shared a home, and built a private life far from the public eye. Benavides later inherited Burr's entire estate, a quiet confirmation of their lifelong bond. "I am fiercely protective of those I love," Burr once said, and that explains a lot. He wasn't just hiding his truth, he was protecting it. In a time when being openly gay could destroy a career, he chose secrecy. But the love he shared with Robert was no less real. In fact, it may have been one of the longest and most stable relationships in Hollywood history, even if it had to be lived in the shadows. From a man who created a life of fiction to another who played with the line between truth and self, our next star, Anthony Perkins, was both a horror icon and a man desperately trying to outrun his own reflection. The story behind Norman Bates is darker than you ever imagined. Anthony Perkins. Anthony Perkins terrified audiences as Norman Bates in Psycho. His soft-spoken voice and twitchy mannerisms hid a monster, at least on screen. But off-screen, Perkins was hiding something else. He was a gay man trapped by fear, fame, and the expectations of the times. In the 1950s and 60s, Perkins had multiple romantic relationships with men, including actor Tab Hunter and dancer Rudolf Nureyev. These affairs were passionate but always private. The studios had strict rules. No open homosexuality, no rumors. So Perkins, who had a gentle spirit and shy nature, played along. He even entered therapy to try and fix himself. It didn't work, because there was nothing wrong with him. In 1973, at age 41, Perkins shocked Hollywood by marrying a woman, photographer and actress Barry Berenson. They had 2 sons and lived a seemingly normal family life. But those close to Perkins knew the marriage didn't erase his past. His bisexuality remained unspoken, even though he had lived years loving men. Perkins once said, "I've learned more about love from being afraid of it than from doing anything brave." Tragically, Perkins died from AIDS-related pneumonia in 1992, just before he was ready to go public with his story. His widow, Barry, later revealed he had hidden his diagnosis for 2 years, even from close friends. She said, "He wanted to protect us. He didn't want pity." Just 9 years later, Barry herself died in the 9/11 attacks, leaving their children orphaned, a heartbreaking end to a story already full of secrets and sorrow. Today, Anthony Perkins is remembered for his brilliant acting, but also as a man shaped by shame, by silence, and by a world that didn't let him live fully. His legacy isn't just Norman Bates. It's the quiet courage it took to survive, even when he couldn't speak his truth out loud. Next, we'll meet 2 Hollywood legends who made headlines just by living together. Cary Grant and Randolph Scott didn't have to say a word. Their photos told a love story the industry tried desperately to erase. Cary Grant. Cary Grant was one of the most charming men in Hollywood history. Dapper, elegant, and smooth-talking, he starred in classics like North by Northwest and To Catch a Thief. Audiences loved him, women adored him, and men wanted to be him. But what many didn't know was that Cary Grant shared his home, and likely his heart, with fellow actor Randolph Scott for over a decade. The 2 met on the set of Hot Saturday in 1932, and shortly after, they moved in together. Studio press tried to spin it, calling them confirmed bachelors who simply enjoyed each other's company. But private photos told another story, the 2 sunbathing, cooking together, or just reading at home. They looked like any couple deeply comfortable in each other's presence. Grant even once said, "I don't care what people say, I like what I like." Still, the pressure to conform was huge. Both men were pushed into studio-arranged romances with women. Grant ended up marrying 5 different women throughout his life, but the rumors never stopped. Some insiders whispered that every marriage was part of an elaborate cover. Even after he and Scott moved apart, they remained close. Friends believed their bond never truly ended, even as the cameras stopped rolling. Today, their relationship remains one of the most famous, unconfirmed romances in old Hollywood. No public statements, no open love letters, just a quiet companionship that stood the test of time. In a world that demanded silence, Cary Grant and Randolph Scott chose privacy over shame, and their story continues to fascinate fans to this day. Our next story follows a man who refused to trade love for fame. Billy Haynes didn't just walk away from Hollywood. He walked toward the man he loved, and in doing so became one of the bravest stars of his time, William "Billy" Haynes. Billy Haynes was once one of the biggest movie stars in America. In the 1920s and early 30s, he was a charming, cheeky leading man, winning fans with his comedic timing and boyish grin. But behind that playful screen presence was a man who made a bold decision few dared to make. He refused to hide his love for another man. That man was Jimmy Shields, his lifelong partner. The 2 met in 1926 and moved in together not long after. Everyone in their inner circle knew they were a couple, but the studios weren't as understanding. MGM head Louis B. Mayer gave Billy an ultimatum: marry a woman to protect his image or lose everything. Haynes didn't hesitate. He chose Jimmy. Mayer fired him on the spot. Hollywood shut its doors, but Billy didn't stop living. He and Jimmy reinvented themselves as interior designers to the stars. Their work was elegant, tasteful, and soon in high demand, even by the same people who once turned their backs on them. Joan Crawford once called them the happiest married couple in Hollywood. And they were, staying together for nearly 50 years through fame, fallout, and everything in between. When Billy died in 1973, Jimmy was inconsolable. He couldn't bear life without him and took his own life just months later. Their love story is both heartbreaking and heroic. They lived honestly when the world punished honesty, and in doing so became quiet icons of queer courage in a time of silence. As brave as Billy Haynes was, our next story is a reminder of how cruel Hollywood could be. Ramon Novarro had it all: fame, beauty, and talent. But behind his success was a life filled with secrets and a violent end no one saw coming. Ramon Novarro. Ramon Novarro was one of the first Mexican-American stars in Hollywood. He was a massive heartthrob in the silent era, especially after his breakout role in Ben-Hur in 1925. Women were obsessed, men admired him, but Novarro was hiding something the world wasn't ready for. He was gay, and his truth would eventually cost him everything. The studios kept tight control over his image. They spread rumors about affairs with leading ladies, while Novarro quietly built a personal life behind closed doors. He had discreet relationships with men, including journalist Herbert Howe, who helped him keep the press at bay. Ramon was deeply religious, torn between his Catholic guilt and his desire to live freely. That conflict never left him. He once told a friend, "I've tried to make peace between who I am and who I'm supposed to be." As time passed, Novarro's career faded, and the loneliness grew. In 1968, he was living a quiet life in his Los Angeles home when two young brothers, Paul and Tom Ferguson, showed up, claiming to be hustlers. They believed Novarro had thousands in cash hidden inside. When he wouldn't give it up, they tortured and beat him to death with a lead pipe. The news shocked the world. Headlines focused on scandal, not the tragedy of a man who had lived a life in fear. Even in death, the public shamed him. But his close friends and family remembered a kind, deeply sensitive man who only wanted to be accepted. Today, Ramon Novarro's name is often mentioned as one of Hollywood's early queer icons, not just for his talent, but for the painful reminder of what silence, secrecy, and prejudice can cost. Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo was only 16 when he broke through in Rebel Without a Cause, starring alongside James Dean. With his soft features, intense eyes, and raw vulnerability, he became a teen idol overnight. But behind the fame, Mineo was a young man battling deep fear, not because he wasn't talented, but because he was gay, and Hollywood wasn't ready for it. In the 1950s and 60s, Mineo tried to play the studio game. He went on publicity dates with young actresses, all while quietly building romantic relationships with men. His longtime partner was actor and playwright Courtney Burr III. Friends described them as deeply in love, but they had to keep their relationship hidden. He couldn't be himself in the world he worked in, Burr once said. He always felt like he was running. By the late 1960s, Sal's career started to stall. He was no longer the pretty teen heartthrob the studios wanted, and his sexuality became harder to hide. Yet instead of vanishing, he found new passion in theater. He came out privately to those he trusted and directed plays that explored themes of identity, power, and pain. He told one interviewer, "I just want to do work that matters and live with honesty, even if it costs me." Then in 1976, Sal was stabbed to death in the alley outside his West Hollywood apartment. At first, rumors swirled that it was a hate crime. In truth, it was a robbery gone wrong. But the media focused more on his sexuality than his legacy. Mineo was only 37. Today, he's remembered as a pioneer, one of the first major stars to begin living authentically before it was safe. His bravery laid groundwork for the ones who came after. From a man who dared to live honestly to another whose humor masked a lifetime of hiding, our next story looks at Paul Lynde, the king of camp whose flamboyance made people laugh, even as it quietly told the story of a man longing to be understood. Paul Lynde. Paul Lynde made people laugh. Whether on Bewitched or Hollywood Squares, his quick wit and biting one-liners were legendary. But while America laughed, Paul was hiding a truth many suspected, but no one talked about. He was a gay man living in a time when being out meant being out of work. Lynde never publicly came out, but he didn't exactly hide either. His on-screen persona was flamboyant, full of innuendo, and sharp with sass. Viewers often joked that he was obviously gay, but in those days, being obvious didn't mean you were safe. Studios preferred him to remain a caricature, funny, loud, but never real. He once said in a rare candid moment, "I'm not going to explain myself. I am what I am, and I deal with it." Despite the laughter, Paul's personal life was marked by loneliness and tragedy. He struggled with alcohol and bouts of depression, often retreating from public life between jobs. His close friends knew the real man, thoughtful, intelligent, and deeply private. He had romantic relationships, but never publicly acknowledged a partner. He feared what it might cost him in an industry that only tolerated queerness as long as it stayed a joke. Lynde died of a heart attack in 1982 at age 55. The tabloids speculated, whispered, and judged, but his fans mourned a legend. In recent years, LGBTQ+ historians have reclaimed his story, not just as a comic icon, but as a man who quietly endured. His sharp tongue masked a tender soul, one that gave millions joy, even while hiding its own truth. While Paul Lynde lived behind the laugh track, our next story is about a man who sued to keep his truth buried. Liberace dazzled millions with sequins and sparkle, but offstage he was terrified of the world discovering who he really was. Liberace was pure spectacle, the glittering suits, the diamond-encrusted pianos, the candelabras. He was a Vegas sensation, a household name, and one of the highest-paid entertainers of the 20th century. But behind the rhinestones and smiles, Liberace was hiding a life he refused to admit, even to himself. He was gay, and he spent his life denying it publicly, despite living it privately. In the 1950s, a British newspaper hinted that Liberace was homosexual. Instead of ignoring it, he sued for libel and won. The case set a chilling example for other closeted celebrities. Deny, lie, and protect the brand at all costs. Liberace once said, "I don't give concerts, I put on a show." That philosophy applied to his entire life. Everything was performance, even his silence. One of his most publicized relationships was with Scott Thorson, a much younger man Liberace took under his wing in the late 70s. Thorson lived with him, called him Lee, and was treated to plastic surgery to look more like the entertainer. But when the relationship ended, Scott sued him for palimony, a lawsuit that blew the closet door open. The details were scandalous, and though Liberace continued to deny the relationship, the public wasn't convinced anymore. In 1987, Liberace died from complications related to AIDS. Even then, he refused to admit the cause. His publicist claimed it was anemia. Only after his death did the truth come out. The man who had built his legacy on beauty, showmanship, and control was finally seen in full, not as a fraud, but as someone shaped by a world that gave him everything but freedom. Coming up next, we return to someone who never denied himself, Farley Granger. He lived his truth softly but surely, and in doing so, showed that honesty doesn't always need a headline. Sometimes it just needs time. Farley Granger. Farley Granger wasn't just handsome, he was captivating. With boyish good looks and a subtle charm, he starred in Alfred Hitchcock's Ropin' Strangers on a Train, where he often played complex, emotionally conflicted characters. But in real life, Granger wasn't acting when it came to emotional complexity. He was openly bisexual in private, at a time when even whispered rumors could destroy a career. Granger didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He dated both men and women, including famous names like Shelley Winters and composer Leonard Bernstein. But while he didn't deny his relationships with men, he didn't make public statements either. In a way, he found a middle path. He once said, "I never hid anything, I just didn't talk about it." It was a quiet defiance, not enough to be targeted, but enough to be true to himself. While Farley Granger found peace later in life, our next story focuses on someone who stayed closeted until the very end, even as people around him knew the truth. George Nader wasn't just a movie star. He was part of a secret Hollywood family built on loyalty and love. George Nader George. Nader was a rising star in the 1950s. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a clean-cut look that studios loved, he was positioned as a potential rival to Rock Hudson. But behind the camera, Nader's life took a very different path, one defined not just by secrecy, but by a powerful sense of community among closeted stars. Nader was gay and in a long-term relationship with Mark Miller, who was both his partner and business manager. What made their story unique was the support they received from their closest friend, Rock Hudson. The three men lived in the same circle, often vacationing and dining together. When scandal threatened one, they protected each other. A friend once said, "They had their own world, they understood each other's risks." And finally, we come to a man who refused to apologize for who he was, even if it meant never reaching the superstardom he deserved. Dirk Bogarde didn't just act through the shadows, he wrote them into history. Dirk Bogarde. Dirk Bogarde was one of Britain's biggest post-war stars. With his sharp features and intense gaze, he could have had the world. But instead of chasing endless fame, he chose roles that challenged audiences and quietly mirrored the life he lived. Because Bogarde, though never publicly out, spent over 40 years in a deeply committed relationship with another man. His partner was Anthony Forwood, an actor turned talent agent. The two met in the 1940s and were inseparable until Forwood's death in 1988. They shared homes in England and France, often described by friends as perfect companions. Bogarde never called Forwood his lover publicly. He referred to him as his manager, friend, or housemate. But the truth lived in the silences and in the pages of Bogarde's books. These men gave us unforgettable performances, but their greatest roles were the lives they lived off camera. Behind every carefully crafted image was a truth that Hollywood wasn't ready to hear. Yet they lived it anyway. Some found quiet joy, others paid a heartbreaking price, but all of them paved the way for a more honest industry, whether they knew it or not. Their stories matter, not just because they were stars, but because they were human. If one story moved you today, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep the conversation going.